Things about the Revolutionary War you might not know. If you grew up in the American school system, you are probably well versed in the Revolutionary War. What else could there be besides George Washington, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Paul Revere, and the surrender at Yorktown? But, as with any war, and especially any revolutionary period, there were a number of bizarre events that are nearly impossible to explain. Revolution had been brewing long before the shot heard round the world in 1775. Here are some of the oddest things we could find about the Revolutionary War. Before we get started, subscribe to the Fun Facts Galore channel so you don't miss any future videos. Number 1. Some British soldiers were actors by night. While the British Army held New York City, they entertained themselves by performing in Broadway shows. Shakespeare plays were their most popular shows, chosen for their sophisticated content as well as their British origins. Despite the fact that they never wrote or performed original plays, the soldiers-turned-actors were known for inserting their own prologues filled with pro-British sentiments. Some colonial armies attempted to stage their own theatrical performances, but were never successful in producing fully realized plays. Number 2. There was a secret plan to kill George Washington. A secret committee discovered a plot to assassinate the future president in 1776, shortly before the Declaration of Independence was signed. After arriving in New York, Washington formed the committee to prepare for a British attack. The plan's most shocking aspect was that it was led by none other than his personal bodyguard, Thomas Hickey. Several other prominent people were also involved, including New York's governor and mayor. However, because Hickey was the closest to Washington and was suspected of carrying out the murder, he was the only one executed. The committee that provided the information that saved Washington's life would later lay the groundwork for the modern-day CIA. Number 3. Invisible ink was used to communicate top-secret messages. Dr. James J., brother of Founding Father John Jay, developed invisible ink from ferrous sulfate and water that could be used to write secret messages and dried completely clear. To see the invisible messages, the paper would have to be heated or doused with a revealing chemical. George Washington and his men made extensive use of invisible ink, writing between the lines in letters and on the backs of books. Number 4. Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man to fight in the Revolutionary War. Deborah Sampson, a fierce and loyal patriot, wanted to contribute to the war in a way that women were not expected to. To join the Continental Army, she disguised herself as Robert Shirtliff. Despite her military prowess and frequent injuries, she was able to go unnoticed for 2 years. Her disguise lasted until 1783, when she became very ill and awoke in a hospital. Number 5. Some Revolutionary War veterans had their photographs taken. Have you ever wondered what revolutionaries looked like in the late 1700s? Fortunately, 6 of the men who fought in the war lived long enough to see the invention of photography. They were photographed in 1863 as part of an effort to locate any remaining Revolutionary War veterans. Some of the men even remembered meeting George Washington and other historical figures. Number 6 to 200 original copies of the Declaration of Independence were made. One fully signed and preserved Declaration of Independence can be found at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. When the Declaration of Independence was written, printer John Dunlap printed 200 copies. One copy was signed by all 56 members of the Second Continental Congress and is now housed in the National Archives. The only names on the remaining 199 broadsides were John Hancock and Charles Thompson, Secretary of the Congress. Only 26 of those copies are still in existence today, with the rest lost to history. Number 7. More soldiers died from disease than battle. Because soldiers were constantly in contact with people from all over the world, they unknowingly exchanged diseases. These diseases were fatal for many people who were not immune or had previously been exposed. Smallpox was the most common killer, which George Washington contracted shortly before the Revolution. Exact figures have been lost to time, but it is estimated that for every troop killed on the battlefield, approximately 2 more died of disease. Number 8. Many revolutionary women were spies. Many women did not want to wait for their husbands to return from the war. Because they were unable to fight, with the exception of Deborah Sampson, they helped the Patriot cause by spying on British soldiers who occupied their towns. Market sellers and maids who appeared to be friendly to the British were actually listening in on their conversations and alerting Patriot forces to any significant British movement. Lydia Darrah, one of these women, was able to warn revolutionary forces that the British were planning an attack on Washington in Pennsylvania. This warning was critical in preventing a massacre at Whitemarsh. Number 9. Minutemen helped win the fight. Minutemen were men who contributed to the war on a more local level. These men, who were generally younger and less trained than General Army forces, formed militias to protect their towns and were ready to go at a moment's notice if the British attacked. The Minutemen were self-taught and supplied their own weapons, but they frequently lacked strong leadership. Many military actions were carried out by local militias prior to the start of the actual war, particularly in Massachusetts. Number 10. Paul Revere was also a dentist. The famous Paul Revere did more than just ride through Boston to warn his neighbors of an impending British attack. Prior to the Revolution, Revere was a skilled silversmith who dabbled in dentistry on the side. A lucrative, if untrained, trade at the time. Revere was asked to identify the body of a soldier he was thought to know 2 months after his famous midnight ride. Revere examined the man's mouth to see if he had the same ivory teeth Revere had made for him and wired into his jaw. It was a good match for Major Joseph Warren. This is thought to be the first instance of identification using dental forensics. I hope you learned a little more about the Revolutionary War than you knew before. Let us know if there are some you want to see added, and thanks for watching.